So this is part 2, and we'll be dealing today specifically with the halachic questions. Last week I dealt more with the background from the parsha to try to understand the whole notion of the borrowing of Egyptian goods and how to understand it. We saw several approaches. The last approach that we spoke about was basically the one which is the direct segue to what we're going to be speaking about today. The idea that it was actually a part of the war effort. In other words, as part of the war effort, there was this idea that the spoils of war would go to the victorious side, and we were the victorious side, except that normally speaking, we would have been doing the fighting ourselves, and in this particular case, the Ribono Shalom did the fighting for us. This idea, by the way, well, I'm sorry?
The crown from the Torah.
So
We're talking about claiming back.
Right, so we'll get right. So then just quickly there,
okay.
And then we looked at based on that, and I'll just mention also, if you think about it, I'm not going to quote the references now, but think about it, the Haggadah, how the Torah, the Baal Haggadah speaks about the references to Zoha Cherev. This is the sword. In other words, of the Yetziot and the Yetziot Mitzrayim, even though there's no actual sword, but the metaphorical sword of God is being waged. And then we looked at 2 different halachic questions, which just to remind everyone of those, which are here in. I'm not going to read them inside now because of the time. I'll just refer to them. The 2 primary questions that we looked at were here, and number 8 was the question of the lettuce fields of Dir Yassin, which is now in Har Nof. And here I was misled. There's a mistake here in the tshuva, which I looked at afterwards. I hadn't paid attention to it. Dir Yassin actually the battle was on April 9th, 1948, Rosh Chodesh Nisan of Tafshin Chet, not Tafshin Tet. Here in the tshuva, there's a mistake in the tshuva. It's written as Tafshin Tet. So this was actually, the battle took place. He said it's the beginning of the war, and I said it wasn't the beginning of the war. It's Tafshin Tet. It's almost towards the end of the war, but actually it's Tafshin Chet. It's before the state was established, before Ben Gurion's declaration, and that may be important as we discuss it a little in a moment. But the idea is that basically you have these fields which have just been abandoned. It's 2 weeks before Pesach. And the question is, can you use the maror, can you use the lettuce for maror? Is it considered to be stolen goods? That's the question that's being raised. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, which comes a little bit later, after in the 1950s, which is here in number 9, is a situation where a person lives in Haifa. He is a survivor from Hungary. He comes to Yerushalayim at the time on Sukkot. It talks about it's on Sukkot. This was the time to go to Har Tzion. Har Tzion was the closest that you could get to the Ir Atikah, to the Kotel, to Har Habayit, and people would make an Aliyah L'Regel. They would come to Yerushalayim on Sukkot to get as close as they come. And he comes to Har Tzion. He's in the Bet Knesset in Har Tzion. He sees the crown of the Torah that was his family's crown, and had been looted by the Iron Cross of the Hungarian or the Iron Arrow, was it? The Nazi party of the Hungarian Nazi party. He has the Sefer Torah. He had been able to save the Sefer Torah. The crown had been was stored in a neighboring home, and was lost. And now he wants to reunite the crown with the Torah. He has clear simanim. His parents' names are engraved on the crown, and it's very clear that this is the crown. And the administration of this Bet Knesset, the Gabaim, whoever is in charge, is refusing to hand the crown over, and they're saying that they're not, as we saw, they're not denying that it had belonged to him before the war, but they basically say that that at this point he had given up any expectation and hope of ever seeing it again, and it had been in effect become hefker, and they had saved it. Just to, and we'll see this as we go on. It's basically that the storyline is that it's all of this Judaica had been rounded up by the Allied armies and had been given over to the Joint Committee for Distribution and for Refugees, and there had been notices put out, but obviously he hadn't seen the notices, and many people didn't see the notices of particular property. And so then, at a certain point, the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, whatever was left was distributed to various Jewish organizations. That was the idea. So this particular crown had reached its place on Har Zion, and now he wants to literally restore the Ateret Liyoshna. He wants to take the crown and return it to his Sefer Torah, and the custodians of Har Zion are refusing. And now it comes to Din Torah. The third question, which we hadn't spoken, but we'll just bring it up now, is I don't think that we mentioned it directly, is in the back is the tshuva of Rav Rimon with regard to, we did talk about it, with regard to property in Gaza, in Gaza, that Chayalim want to remove it from whatever property it is, from the homes before it's destroyed. The question is, can our Chayalim use this kind of, can we take spoils of war today? Let's put it that way. Right, that's really the three questions, and now with that, let's get into some of the halachic nitty-gritty. So first, let's talk about from the perspective, taking a look at source number 10. This is, before we could talk about things that are lost in war and the like, to talk about, well, if you will, a more commonplace type of loss, where you have objects, taking a look at the Rambam, source number 10, korot v'avanim ve'etzim u'chiyotzeh behen sheshatvam hanahar. So you have different goods, including building goods, beams, stones, and the like, that have been swept away by the river. Im nityashua ba'alim mehen. So if the owners have given up any hope of retrieving them, this is tsunami, harei elu mutarin. So then they are permissible to whoever finds them. V'hen shel matzilan, whoever retrieves them, they belong to them. V'im eno yodea im yashu lo. So you find, things that have been swept down river. Right, there was a flood 10 kilometers upriver, and now you find it, and so you don't know what the owners are thinking. You don't know if the owners are alive, dead. You don't know anything about them. Chayav lahachzir. So then you have a responsibility if the owner comes forward to give it to them. And all the more so if the owners are following the road next to the river, trying to retrieve their property. In other words, if it's clear from the owner's behavior that they have not given up hope, so then the property belongs to the original owner. If you have a doubt, so then we will assume that it still belongs to the original owner. If the circumstances are such that the original owners almost definitely have given up hope, then it belongs to the finder. Lefikach, and therefore he continues in halacha bet. Hamatzil min anar mizuto shel yam mishlotav shel nahar. So if you retrieve from the river, or zuto shel yam we would probably call a tidal wave, a tsunami, Shlulitav shel nahar, or from the banks of the river, the eddies of the river. Umina gayas. Now the Rambam is adding new circumstance. If you retrieve from armed forces, in other words, if things have been pirated, and now you are purchasing it from those pirates. Umin hadleika, or there had been a fire. Min ha'ari, min hadov. There's lions, tigers, bears, etc. Right? Namer is normally translated as tiger, but there were no tigers in the Middle East at the time, so we'll say leopards, bardalas, cheetahs. Im yada b'vaday shenit yashua ba'alim. So again, if you know for sure that the ba'alim have given up hope, harei elu shelo v'im lo yada yachzir. Right. So the Ravid disagrees, and the Ravid says that the Amar Avram elu divrei teimahim. In other words, the Ravid is believe that you can assume that the owners have given up hope without knowing for sure. The Rambam's trying to say you have to have a pretty high level of certainty that the owners have given up hope. The Ravid seems to disagree and says that the status, the basic status quo position is that they've given up hope. Okay, fine. We jump a few hundred years to the Shulchan Aruch, to number 11, and he brings this halacha, but he seems to go in the direction of the Ravid. What does it mean? Because he says, "Batzil me'ariva adov zuto shel yam." So if you save it from the lion, the bear, the tidal wave, just skip to the bold print. Harei elu shelo afilu habal omed v'tzavach. Right? It belongs to the finder, even if the original owner is standing there screaming, "It's mine." In other words, if the circumstances are such that a reasonable person could not expect to be able to retrieve his property, so then even if you have a Meshugana who's refusing, who's in denial, that's his 6 stages. He hasn't reached acceptance yet. So he's still in denial. It doesn't matter. He can be denying all he wants because we look at the objective circumstance. And the objective circumstances under these conditions are that there's no way that this person could possibly have expected to have it, a reasonable person, and therefore it became hefker, and whoever finds it, it belongs to him. This idea is applied halacha l'maaseh, yeah?
No, finish the 5.
Okay.
And then I'll ask a
Okay.
question.
So in number 12, I once quoted this tshuva here. I think someone mentioned that they knew they had met Rav Leibus in the Bronx where he ended. He was a survivor from the Ukraine. He made it to the United States and ended up being the Av Beis Din of the Beis Din of America. And he has his Sifrei Tshuva are known as Beit Avi. His father's name was Avraham Yaakov, so it's the acronym of Avraham, the Aleph Bet, and the Yud, so it's Beit Avi. But in any event, in the Tshuva, so it's referring to Svarim that had been abandoned or had been confiscated by the Nazis, and were being used, and then following the Nazis, whatever had been survived was in the hands of the Soviets, and someone had saw that this was the circumstances, saw that the Sfarim were being treated in an incredibly disrespectful manner, right? Even some of it being used as toilet paper in the tshuva, and so he went and was able to salvage and save all of these Sfarim, and then the original owners come forward and want them, and say that that they belong to them, and are able to prove that indeed they belonged to them before the war. So this is the approach of of Reb Levis. He says, "Afilu lefima shekatvu atosov b'bakama." There's a source in the Gemara. Here's just an example where crusaders, because that's what the Balei Tosfot are dealing with, or marauders, steal svarim. So then there's an assumption, the Tosfot says, that the original owners do not give up hope. Why? Because there's no market for these manuscripts. Remember, we're talking about the Middle Ages, so they're manuscripts, not printed books, and that they're valuable in terms of the material themselves, the vellum, and they have added value because the Goyim know that they can sell it to other Jews, but they have no other market for it. Right? They can't use it for anything for their own use. So so the Tosfot says, as a result, the owners know that even though it's been now, their gold, they've given up hope of ever seeing again. But their svarim, they assume that they're going to be sold to another Jewish community, and they can somehow track it down, and therefore they don't have Yeush. That's what the Tosfot says. So relying on that, he says that precedent doesn't apply in our case. Right, to go to the bold print here, Mikol Makom B'Nidon Didan, this is source number 12 in the bold, in the middle, Shlo Sheich Be'avanotenu Harabim Tamsa. To our great misfortune, this does not apply. Shemiyom Briyat Ha'olam Lo Hayta Gzeira Nara Kazo Lahashmid Laharog La'abed Al Kol Yisrael Shamu Shamayim. There's been nothing like the Shoah. And Uvematzav Kazem Kfar Nityashu Michayehem Mirichusham Lo Kol Shechem. If these people couldn't have possibly expected to survive, it's a miracle that anyone survived. So if you don't expect to be able to get out alive, how can you possibly claim that you had a reasonable expectation of being able to retrieve your property? So as a result, he says that we have to assume that under these circumstances, the default position is that there was Yeush, and as a result, whoever has these Svarim today, so they are considered to be halachically the rightful owner.
Now, that even strengthens my question.
Okay.
This approach of the Shulchan Aruch and the approach that you just mentioned, as opposed to the approach to Tosfot,
right?
Isn't that very dangerous? Because you could make the same claim about the land of Israel. Oh, it was once belongs to the Jews. Yeah, they were. It no longer belongs to the Jews for this exact same reason.
Okay, so we're going to come back to that. But right now we're not even there. No, it's now.
I think that's very dangerous.
Okay, you're right.
Approach.
Okay. By the way,
and not fair, but that's something else.
Okay, but on the other hand, and I've seen this, and that the argument for trying to just to sharpen the question, okay, or the dilemma, because it's a double-edged sword. As I'm involved in I think I mentioned last time, or I don't know if I mentioned it here, maybe someone else, that I've been involved in a dispute with the Croatian authorities. My father was born in Zagreb to a comfortable family. We have records of all of the different properties that they owned before the war, and they were fortunate enough to escape in the middle of the war. Whole story, but leaving the properties behind, obviously. And so most of the properties by law we don't have a claim to, rightfully or wrongfully. One apartment we do, and we're in the process of trying to have it returned to our ownership. But but you could make the argument, well, if we're trying to get that property back, right? So then the Arabs who left Yerushalayim and left property here should also have a claim. In other words, you can have all of these claims go in all the different directions, and just because we want to, I want to get that property back if I can to save something from from those anti-Semites. Yes, and so, but why don't the Arabs who were expelled in 48 have the same type of claim? No, you can have. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not giving an answer. I'm just pointing out the problematic nature of all of this. Yeah.
Even if the person never died in the Holocaust, the person may still have had heirs in other parts of the world and they knew that the Holocaust would never reach them because of where they were located, and therefore, even today, even in the last number of years, and even today, at this moment, there's been litigation going on where heirs have been trying to reclaim valuable works of art.
Correct. Right. So all of that it's the same type of question, but at the same time, they could argue that the owners at that moment had no expectation of ever having it, and therefore they lost claim to it. Yeah.
More modern question is these are special circumstances where there are things of that you consider its efficacy in such a law. A Beit Knesset puts up a sign that says if it's not claimed within 30 days, I'm claiming the Hefka. Are they allowed to do that? Because the original owner may not be.
Different question. Different question, and an important question, but we'll leave that aside at the moment. Yeah.
The Shulchan Aruch, which you quoted, said if the man is shouting that it's mine, but if he has evidence like a document or a signanim.
Yes, that's the case there. No one's arguing that it belongs. In other words, he sees his, we'll say, he sees, I don't know, his trees, right, being swept downriver, and he's chasing them the whole time, right, and they land on a bank. And he said, "These are my trees." He gives all the simanim in the world. He never even, it was a type of, but again, it has to be a type of claim that he really didn't have an objectively speaking, it really wasn't reasonable for him to expect it. If it's like a shift down the river, and okay, it might be a mile, a kilometer, 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers, whatever it's going to be, but I'll get it. That's something else.
But if it was booked with his name,
yeah. So it doesn't matter. In other words, simanim don't matter. No one is arguing in these cases who the original owner was. The only question is whether or not he had given up hope, and therefore he lost claim to it at that moment. So, before we get, again, we're moving towards the war cases. But before we get to the war cases, so in this case, just a natural disaster. Okay? So it does have a natural disaster, and you're trying to get it, etc. So, there's another layer to it. So the layer is that so here it's found with regard to another case, not of natural disaster, a simpler case even. If you lose an item in an area where you don't expect to find it. And the case that the Gemara is talking about is where it was a heathen area, right? That the majority of the people are not Jews. And therefore, if you lose something, they at that time are not bound by any laws to return lost property. So even if you have a siman, so there's an expectation of yeush. And now another Jew finds it in that marketplace. So with the siman, his name, his wallet, etc. But does he have to return it? So the basic halacha here is that you don't have to return it, because again, there was yeush. Again, you have to establish that there was yeush, that the person had given up hope of finding it, and then once I find it, at that point I don't have a chiyuv to return it. However, just to hold on 1 second, the halacha is that here is a classic example of lifnim mishurat hadin. Classic example of going beyond the letter of the law, doing what is, to use the pasuk, tov v'yashar be'enei Hashem Elokecha, to do what is right and upstanding in the eyes of God, and you don't have to give it back, but it's the right thing to do, and you should give it back. That halacha is that's what's brought lahalacha.
But
Okay.
you're not a sinner if you don't give it back.
What?
But
You're not a sinner, per se, but you should be giving it back. Yeah.
How do you judge if someone has given up hope? Does it have to be verbalized?
Most generally speaking, it's based on circumstances. No, it's circumstantial
And
evidence.
somebody else is judging, not that
Or that, well, we would say. So, for example, if I find just a simple case, if I find 100 shekel bill on a crowded street, right, and there are no simanim on it because it's just a shy. You look around, and no one is looking for it, right? You pick it up, right? At that point, if you dropped money, do you really expect it to necessarily be there? You hope that it's there when you come back, but you know that you don't even know where you dropped it, right? So the Gemara talks about different circumstances, etc. But society has to be able to function. Also, in other words, you can't have a situation where every item you're worried about who the original owner is, etc. No, so based on circumstantial evidence, you have to ask the question, and what is considered siman, what's not considered siman. There are a lot of halachot that involve. But so one of the circumstances where the Gemara established that there was a presumption of Yeush is if the item is found in an area where the majority of the people there are not concerned with returning it, right? Which at that case was the assumption amongst the non-Jewish population, and therefore it could be assumed if I lost something that I'm not going to have a possibility of retrieving it. So you have the halacha of lifnim mishurat hadin, but there is an important aspect of lifnim mishurat hadin here. Very important aspect, which is what the Ramah says. The Ramah says, "V'im hu ani ubal ha'aveda ashir, ein tzarich lasot lifnim mishurat hadin." In other words, because what is lifnim mishurat hadin?
Good thing Ramah didn't live in the 21st century.
Could be. Okay, so this might change also. And here it's a question of what is equitable. In other words, not what is right and what is wrong. Din is a question of what's right and what's wrong. If something is mine, you can't take it. You could be poor, I could be rich. Roles reversed, it doesn't matter. Din is din. Something is mine, it's not yours. Something is yours, it's not mine. It's as simple as that. And so the law tries to determine, okay, what belongs to whom under what circumstances. That's the law. Lifnim mishurat hadin, the Ramah is saying, is not simply saying it really belongs to that person, do the right thing to give it back, but rather do what is the most equitable solution. So what is the most equitable solution might be to keep it. It's because it's a if you will, social justice here, is that here this is an opportunity for the poor finder, and not too much of a loss to the rich loser. And so the equitable solution here, it's a type of compromise, as it were. But the type of compromise is in the equitable circumstances. So you're right. What Harold said is absolutely correct. Though, is that the Ramah might agree that what is considered equitable might be determined by society. And I would think, by the way, I'm not sure that in our society we might be even more equitable than in the Ramah society. In other words, with all our social safety nets and all of these other things that we have in terms of just something like something as basic as Social Security, I don't know, which 100 years ago was considered to be radically left. Right, and you needed a Great Depression in order to have it instituted in most Western countries. And now it's a given, right? So all sorts of things that we expect the government to do is something which is modern. So you would have to ask the question: okay, under these circumstances and the like, be that as it may, so that's one aspect. The next aspect, specifically to our question, number 14, Hamatzil me'ariv adov v'zuto shel yam v'shlotav shel harei elu shelo Afilu habal omed tzovech. So that's the halacha that we just learned before. And the Rama says, Mikom makom haga tovi yashar lahachzir. So it is the equitable, the good and the straightforward approach is to return it. Va'af agav de midina en chayavin lahachzir b'avadot elu im gazar hamelach. Now until now we're just talking about, okay, what is social justice? Now the Rama says, what if there is a law? Right? Or there's a law that deals with lost property. Right? Society has changed. So he's talking about now in the end of the 16th century, in end of the 16th century in Poland. So there are laws and about returning property. Beforehand, we spoke about the non-Jew and the non-Jew in the time of the Gemara. So the law of that land was that, okay, finders keepers. But now we have laws that are on the books to tell us what needs to be done, right? Not based on halacha per se, perhaps based on in terms of loosely based on the morality of the idea, but not in terms of certainly in terms of the letter of the law of halacha. So here it says, im gazar hamelach o beit din chayav lahachzir mikoach dina de malchuta o hefker beit din hefker. So he says, if there is a law, so then you have to return it because of simply because it's the law of the land. And the law of the land requires you to return it, so return it. And also, the Beit Din has the right, and it's not clear whether he's referring to a Jewish Beit Din or a non-Jewish Beit Din, but could be both, is that there is also a right of that the Beit Din has the right to confiscate property. And when Beit Din confiscates property, it's not that the Beit Din, for whatever the reason, assuming that it's based on a reasonable and just rationale, so that confiscation on the part of Beit Din is legal. So therefore, here you have a law. The law says you have to return property that has been lost because of natural disaster. So then you have to do it, even if halachically you could say that the owner had no reasonable right or reasonable expectation of ever having it, seeing it again. That's what the Rama says. How do I understand this Rama? So there are two different ways of looking at the Rama. The Shach, which is here in source number 16. Skip 15 at the moment, and Rama is just another explanation of this. The example of this, excuse me. So he says, number 16, the Shach, Afagav de minhag garua. This is a bad minhag to return it because keneged din Torah. Halacha says it doesn't belong to the person has given up hope, and now, the law of the land is that we have to return it. This is a bad halacha. It shouldn't be this way. In other words, one of the limitations of din and malchuta is when you have when money is being confiscated unfairly. So this is money that's being, in the Shach's opinion, is money confiscated unfairly because legally it belongs to the finder. If he wants to give it back because he's doing a lifnim meshurat hadin, that's his business. But it's not something that we should be legislating. Yesh lomar, he says, the high minhag hu shenit kankach. There was he doesn't disagree with the halacha. He's saying, if you were just working on Dina de Malchuta, it wouldn't work. But we have taken it and we've made a new takana. We, the Chachamim, have made this new takana that basically says that under the circumstances we will follow the law of the land under these circumstances. So it's not, you could look at it as being, it's somewhat specious in terms of the argument, but he's not trying. It's not that we're following the goyim. It's that we've decided that the goyim halacha is going to be our halacha. Okay, that's the way the Shach deals with it. The Ktsot, a couple of 100 years after the Shach, so he disagrees very strongly with this. He says, no, amna nira dezel lav mina garu ala mina tov yasharhu. Words, the question is, what is the best possible way of doing it? What's the best possible way? So the Shach basically says the best possible way of dealing with these things is what the halacha is. If we are sort of forced to verge from the halacha, so then we'll find the legal rationale for explaining why we're verging from the halacha. The Ktsos says, under these circumstances, the halacha itself isn't the most equitable solution. No, it's the very fact that you have a halacha that tells you that if you want to be tov yashar, if you want to be good and upright, give it back to the person. You don't have to, but you should. That tells you that, if you will, the spirit of the law is to try to be as equitable as possible. That's the spirit of the law in these type of things. So if you were saying do the right thing, is not necessarily doing what you need to do, but do the right thing. So if there's a law that says do the right thing, the Ketzot says, so that means that we've advanced in terms of our morality. This is a larger discussion, which I certainly don't have time to get into. But the question is, do we look at our morality and our as being something which is constantly developing and changing? Or do we not? Do we say that, no, the halacha is what the halacha is? That's sort of what the Shach is saying. And there are changes that are done against our will. Or we're saying, no, that the halacha is given to different societies and different times, and you have to, the fact that we have a different moral understanding is not something which we should be opposed to, and say that we're less, than previous generations. No, we're saying that there has been an advance in human morality, right? The example, slavery, I don't know, that's a good example, right? So I would assume that most people here don't want to would find the idea of owning another human being to be, we'll say, problematic, right? And much worse. But that doesn't. But there is a lot of halachot of dealing with slaves, as we're going to see right now. So this is so this is, as I said, a much larger discussion. But here you see it coming to the fore in this in the halacha. So now let's apply this, what we've said until now, to the cases at hand. Back to the crown. Okay, season 6. So how are we going to? What are we going to do with this particular Sefer Torah, crown? So the psak of the halacha here is the following. In the maskana, this was the psak of the Beit Din on this particular case. Im kain gam nidon, to the bold print of number 18. Im kain gam nidon didan nichlal b'ota takana shetiknu lahachzir lebal hachefetz ksheba liyado misibat gzela v'shod afilu acharei shenityashu ha'ba'alim behem. So this is they ruled in favor of the plaintiff that the crown should be returned to him, even though he had indeed given up hope of ever seeing it again. We're not denying the facts, but it still should be returned. Nosaf al zeh. Okay, so adding to this, lefi tochen hamichtav shekibalnu mehajoint, right, based on the letter that we have received from the joint. יש להניח כי אותו המוסד שטיפל בתשמישי הקדושה שנאספו על ידי חייל הכיבוש האמריקני ונמצאו להם לא עלה על דעתם לשאול את החפצים מבעליהם האמיתיים. But now we have to ask ourselves, what was the chain of events here? So it was not melted down by the Hungarians. And now it comes into they say the American occupation forces. I don't know how it got from Hungary to the American occupation forces, but who knows? Maybe it got moved to Western Germany and it fell into the American zone. In any event, now what were the Americans thinking when they took it and then gave it over to the joint? So they never looked at it as being hefker. They looked at it as trying to find the original rightful owners. It's from that perspective, and if that's the case, so Heim kiblu et zabenat lemosron balehem kshitber lahem mihema. So if you had not made it to the shul in Har Tzion, but had stayed, you would been able to go to the whatever officers were dealing with it from the American Army and prove that this belonged to you. They would have given it to you. Right? So if that's the case, in other words, under these circumstances, it was the law should be that it's not lifnim mishrat, it's not the spirit of the law here, it is the actual law. Because of the, okay, I lost hope of ever seeing it. Fine, good. But now a new owner has it, looking forward to giving it to the rightful owner. Or the original owner. We won't say rightful, because that's what we're trying to determine, who's the rightful owner. So the original owner. So at that point, it becomes the legal property of the original owner if he can prove that it belonged to him. Right? Which, by the way, would begin to talk about the, again, from that perspective, the art cases that you were talking about before, or property. In other words, if the law of the land is such, or the international law, is that the property should be reparated to the original owners or to their heirs, so then from the halachic perspective, we're going to view it as being legally owned by those original owners. Right? So that's going to be the circumstance. So here, within the halacha, we're dealing very much with what is considered to be accepted international legal standards. Yeah.
One thing I don't understand is the concept of immature din.
I'm sorry?
When a din is created, why aren't the Rabbi talking then about if God was doing this right now, what would be good? And what would be the din? Rather than making a din, and then later on, the people have to call it immature din. In other words, why isn't that accepted in the making of the halacha?
Saying, why isn't lifnim mishura din?
Why isn't it?
Okay, so the answer could be that there are just others. I'll give the etc. I hear the question. The short answer, and that's unfortunately the only what I have time for right now, because this is a general case. I once gave a shiur on lifnim mishura din. I can here about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more already. And so we can have another class on that just to review it. But the core answer is what, as I said, lifnim mishura din is what's equitable, and what's equitable changes. The din is looking at other a whole constellation of other situations. So I'll give an example. The halacha is that a zaken ve'ino lefi chvodo. If you have a person who's considered to be a elder of the community, and it is not considered within the community, honorable for him to be walking around with a donkey trying to find the original owner. Right? He's saying, you're the it's a donkey, and you're the leader of Klal Yisrael. What are you walking around with a donkey trying to find the owner? So the halacha is that he doesn't have a chiyuv to find the owner. In other words, what has happened there is that there have been two clashing type of ideals, and the halacha has to decide between the two of them, because either it's going to be done which is in violation of one or the other. Or the honor of this particular zaken is considered to be a value, and the halacha determines, based on limudim in the psukim, that the value of giving proper respect to the elders of the community is more important than the returning of a particular item to a particular owner. Okay, that's the halacha. However, lifnim mishura din, if he decides he wants to do it, he says, I'll deal with the honor issue. He can. In other words, so there is an example, right? And I think this is also a similar type of thing. You have a type of something which is lost. You can say, oh, we can these type of things. If you can find, etc., you should give, or you should say no. So the way that this is 40 years later, you find something, and now there might have been all sorts of commercial transactions that took place based on the assumption that the original owner is no longer there. It doesn't have to be taken into account, right? I have found, let's say the artwork, and it was sold 6 times since, and now I'm the person who happens to own this piece of art when the original owner, or the heir of the original owner, comes forward, right? So why should I lose my money over it, right? And I can't go back and find the person who looted it, right, and all of that. And so there has to be. So I could say, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing. But I think give it back to them. But I also spent $25 million for this Van Gogh, right? So, okay, if I'm Bezos, who I just saw an article that says that he earns. Last year, he earned about $7 million an hour. So he said, okay, 2.5 hours of work. Okay, I'll give it. Fine. But for most of us, $25 million is a lot of money, right? So should I have to give it or not, right? No, so then you can say, yes, it's very nice that you're giving it back, but the expectation shouldn't be there. Right? So each case has to be viewed. Might have to be part 3. Yeah.
The perfect example
of
where halacha and common sense clash. Because basically, we can create situations where anybody who is thoughtful, decent, and worth talking to say, well, it's obvious that this poor guy should have his house back, and the rich guy can afford it. But when you add the word to it of this is the din, and this is what God wants, we get into trouble.
Well, I would just change the one thing that you said. Instead of this is what God wants. In other words, if you think about it, the person, if it's what the Ramah says is a very interesting idea in terms of what's equitable.
Yeah.
But that is very much when you're dealing in legal situations, the law has to be the law. In other words, it could be that you give, again, I'm taking out of the halakha, the law has to be the law. Right? It could be that you give a certain amount of leeway to the judge, the jury, whoever is the determining person at in any given case, to determine, saying, okay, here we should try to make what we would call a pshara, right, of some kind of compromise to help both parties, right. And halacha certainly recognizes pshara as being arbitration in that regard, but it's important to have a baseline as well, and to understand what the baseline is and what I am working off of when I do the baseline. In other words, again, the Ramah is, I think, a brilliant case. In other words, you have a situation, you say, okay, this person found let's say something worth $1,000, 5,000 shekel, let's say, a little bit more than $1,000. 5,000 shekel, and for that person, it's going to make a very big difference in their life, right? And for the person who lost it, it's not going to make such a big difference. So if it belonged to the person originally, it still belonged to the person. People shouldn't. If I'm a wealthy person, people shouldn't just come into my house and say, "Well, you don't really care about 100 shekel here, 100 shekel there." Right, we're just going to take it. Right, we wouldn't be happy about a society that allowed that. But at the same time, under the circumstances where you say legally you don't have a claim to it anymore, so now maybe think about who the finder is and what those circumstances are. Okay. Let's talk about the kinyan kibush, because we only have 6 minutes. I can go longer.
Yeah, till 10:30.
I'll go to 10:30. Okay, great. So so here let's talk about. There's now. All of this, as I said, has is dealing with circumstances where you're not dealing with something which has been taken in war. You're talking about a lost item that has been lost under whatever circumstances may be, and it's a question of determining what a reasonable expectation on the part of the person is, and we're applying it to a case of something stolen by the Nazis. Okay. Is there a special category, though, of property that's transferred during war as an act of war? So the short answer is yes. Halachically, that is viewed as something which is legitimate and unique, with unique laws attached to it. And here is the source. The Gemara, the Mishnah in Gittin says the following. Number 19. Eved shenishpa. You have a slave who is taken captive. Right? There's your property or someone else's property, slave, is taken captive. Ufta'uhu. And someone else redeems the slave. And so there were this group of bandits raided a town, Vikings, let's say, take the slaves of the town, and someone else goes, not the original owner, and redeems the slaves. Okay. Im lishum eved yishtabed. So if the person who redeemed the captives had in mind that they were going to return them to captivity, maybe to the original owner, maybe to the new owner by virtue of the fact that he's the one who did the redeeming, so then the Eved remains in slavery. Im lishum ben chorin, but if he redeemed the person with the understanding, the expectation that he was setting him free, lo yishtabed. So then that slave is now considered to be a free person. Okay, that is what the Mishnah says. In other words, I go, I redeem your property. Right? You own the slave. Slave was captured. I go and I redeem the slave, but I am an abolitionist. I don't believe in slavery. So I'm freeing this slave. And then the original owner says, thank you very much for redeeming my property, and now tries to re-enslave the person. So the halacha is, no, this person is considered to be a free man, and that's the end of the discussion. Right? By the way, we should understand, we're talking about what's known as an Eved Kanaani, right? a non-Jewish slave, but non-Jewish slaves were not non-Jews. Non-Jewish slaves are considered to be Jews. If the slave has to accept upon him or herself the halacha and keeping halacha, and we could say it's a second-class Jew, and immediately upon being freed, whether it's freed by the owner or in this case being freed by someone else by being redeemed, at that point he or she becomes a full Jew. Doesn't require any conversion, because the conversion already happened beforehand when they were a slave in a Jewish home. Okay, obviously there's much more to be said about it, but that's the basic idea. So this person becomes a free Jew and cannot be re-enslaved. Okay, so the Gemara on this tries to find a source for it. How does this happen? Where do we know this happens? So how do I even know that you can own? So the Gemara just says, I'm just going to read one line because that's the critical line for us. In the middle, I should have put it into bold. I apologize. Again, we're still in source number 19. In the second line of the Gemara says, right after the question mark and the fourth word, Ve'ema hanemile bekaspa va bechazaka lo. How is it perhaps the type of kinyanim, the type of acquisitions that work with a slave are only those acquisitions that are in cash, which we'll leave Rashi aside for a moment. If you take a look at number 21, the Rashba explains these two concepts in a slightly different way than we would expect. We'll get to it in just one moment. Chazaka means that if the person was by force. Okay, so this is how the Rashba, and then the pasuk before I get to the Rashba, the Gemara continues and says, Amar Rav Papa Amon u'Moav tiaru b'sichon. We will prove that the handing over, the change of ownership based on forceful or wartime conditions is legal from the Torah, because the lands of Ammon and Moab, meaning on the eastern bank of the Jordan, those lands which Jews are, the Bnei Yisrael were told they can't take the lands of Ammon and Moab. They belong to Ammon and Moab. You can't take their land. However, Sichon was in the middle. Sichon, who was a Canaanite, a Hittite, so he had conquered land from Ammon and Moab. We conquered from Sichon, and therefore that land belongs to us. It was not viewed as taking the land of Ammon and Moab anymore, because in the interim, Sichon had conquered the land. Right? To use the terminology of the Gemara, Tiharu Sichon. Sichon purified it. Was we can't touch Ammon and Moab land, but we can touch Sichon land. And if Sichon happens to take from Ammon and Moab, what's a Jew to do? So that is the idea. Okay, but this is, as if you will, as authoritative a halacha as you can get. Because we know what the ancestral lands of Ammon and Moab were. We have a direct, in the Torah, a direct isur that's given by God tells Moshe, you cannot take the land of Ammon and Moab. And yet, we are allowed, God tells Moshe, to fight Sichon and to take those lands. Right? So how did that happen? They belong to Ammon and Moab. So what it has to be is that that interim state, when Sichon took it, basically at that point it got no longer considered to be the ancestral lands of Ammon and Moab. It belongs to Sichon, and that we are allowed to take the land of Sichon. That's the idea. The Rashba explains it in the following way. Rashba says, source number 21. He says, don't take the term money and chazakah, which normally means an acquisition that's used where you are showing in a tangible way ownership. You know, if you kinyan chazakah, for example, is if you turn the key on the door, so you show you're the owner of the property because you took the key. Okay, this is an example. So here he says that's not what it means in this context. Elakol kinyan shehu midat. This is the underlined in bold. Any kinyan which is by from the agreement of the parties, kri kaspa. That's called kesef. In other words, I give you payment, you give me the goods. Right? Both sides of this transaction are willing participants in it. However, klomar kesef o domelo shamakne makne midat. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter whether it's money or any other form of kinyan. If it's clear that the seller is acquiescing. Aval chazaka, what's chazaka? Kilomar ma shezoche bechozek yad shemachzik bo shelo midat. So there is a type of kinyan, which is a legitimate kinyan, which is taken by force from the original owner, and that is recognized. And that's recognized here. It's an international law. Remember, we're talking about Sichon. It's not the Jews can take it from Sichon, but that means Sichon is the legitimate owner of that land and that property at that point. Right? From every perspective. In other words, basically, the Gemara is laying down international law. International law allows for territory, for property, to be transferred from one entity to the next based on an act of war. Right? So, but you could ask, is it a legitimate act of war? It's not a legitimate act of war. In other words, you can start trying to determine various ideas that are in the halakha, but basically the basic principle is that, yes, conquest is a legitimate form of transaction. Based on this, okay, getting back to our case of the lettuce of Deir Yassin. Okay, back to the maror. Right? Remember, we have our lettuce fields. Can we use a maror? So the Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Tshuva, I won't read it inside now because I want to continue on to some of the other issues, says this is an act of war. In other words, the fields become legally owned by the Jewish forces, in this case the Etzel, that took it over, and as a result, we are not going to view the lettuce as stolen lettuce, because it was a legitimate act of war, and the conquest that took place legitimately transferred the ownership of these fields to the Now, what's interesting is, and he says this is a well-established halakha, right, of legal acquisition through an act of war. However, it needs to be thought about. Remember, it's still 1948. The state hasn't even been declared yet. Right? So is this indeed a legitimate act of war? Now, the Rambam says the following. Rambam is number 23. He differentiates. Right? He's asked with regard to, again, same type of question, Judaica that has been looted from Batei Knesset, and now you are trying to retrieve it. Does it have to go back to the original owners? That's the Rambam's question. And the Rambam says, he distinguishes, Hatshuva, number 23, Hatshuva, the second paragraph. Im zoa biza nasted b'fkudat sultan, harei kena'au vatal din hekdesh. Aval im nivzazu shelo b'rshut sultan, so then, Yishava b'nikita chefetz kama hotzi v'yito. In other words, he says, differentiates. Is this who stole the property in the first place? If it was the army of the Sultan, so the Sultan is the legitimate legitimate ruler here, and so his law is the law of the land. And if his troops under his orders have taken it, so then it belongs to them, and then they can sell it, and it belongs to whoever bought it. But if we're dealing with some band of bandits, and they take it, and the Sultan is trying to track them down, right? You have pirates or whatever it is. So obviously the same force that's being used, but that's not legitimate force. And since it's not legitimate force, the Rambam says, so then I, who purchased this from them, don't have to take a loss. In other words, I now have to go to the original owner and I say, listen, I spent X amount of drachma, whatever it was, to get this back. And now, in order for you, if you want the property back, you have to compensate me for my loss. But the ownership of the property is still, the legal ownership is the original owners. So then the continuation, the question is, and this is, he wants to argue the Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in our case of the lettuce, is that since this is in this pre-state state of the in pre May 15th, 1948, so the shuffling between the groups, between on the Arab side and the Jewish side, is considered to be legal warfare, and they are, in this case the Etzel, the Haganah, are considered to be legitimate armed forces, and so whatever they seize is going to be considered to be their property. On the other hand, by the way, because I do want to get to Rav Rimon, the claim, and this is really, you have to ask this question. I think it's a legitimate question. How do you view the Nazis? In other words, do you view the Nazi conquest, which at that time there wasn't international law. Whereas today, the standards of the international law have changed. So under the conquest at that time, is that considered to be, as difficult as this for us to say, a legally binding conquest? And therefore, the property that was confiscated is considered to be spoils of war. We're the losing side. But still, it's spoils of war, and therefore the original owners don't have a claim to it anymore. So in this particular case of the crown, the Beit Din wants to claim that they didn't say specifically that it wasn't the German Nazis, but they said that the Hungarian Nazis were not considered to be legitimate owners. And because of the nature of the way that they confiscated the property, so it was clear that this was illegitimate, and since it was illegitimate, so then it's it doesn't. They can't have it. Because I have, well, I don't have any time left, but and I guess that's also illegitimate to be taking that time from you. I will just say that Rav Rimon's tshuva, and anyone who is interested in discussing this at greater length, I'm happy to do so. But basically, what Rav Rimon says is that with regard to the law today, I mean, you have a clear army dictates as to what is considered to be allowed, what is allowed to be taken, what's not allowed to be taken, and basically it divides between the use of property now, which is helping the immediate war effort. If people are in a, let's say, in a home in Gaza, and they are using the food items that are in the kitchen, right, in order to feed themselves or the like, or using something, anything that's necessary for the immediate war effort. So that is legal. If it's a question of taking any private property for yourself, that's illegal by the army law. So that's considered, basically says, so as a result, so besides the fact that you always have to listen to what the army says dealing with, that law changes what the halacha would say. In other words, the whole reason for allowing for spoils of war is that we're saying that you have a legitimate, what we call kinyan kibush. You have a legitimate kinyan that's because of conquest. But if the conquering power, in this case Tzahal, is saying that you don't have the right, you, the soldier, don't have the right to take it, so then you can't claim kinyan kibush. Right? If the army itself were to determine, as they did in certain circumstances, they found several million shekel, whatever it was, and they confiscated that money and they transferred it to the Israeli government, that's legitimate. But if it's a question of taking it for you, pocketing something for yourself, so that whatever the army law is becomes the halacha law because of kinyan kibush. Okay.